Hey there, so glad to have you back here on the channel, and it's been a little while. I think these last few weeks has been a very busy few weeks because I've been setting up a totally new live set for a performance that I had last week. And what I wanted to do in this video is walk through that live setup, the rig, the equipment, how it's connected together, not just mechanically, because we've already done a bunch of those videos and I'll link those down below, but this one is more about how it's actually used, how, you know, what things are controlling what and why, and how I have certain pieces of equipment set up in order to be a lot more functional in the type of live set that I do. This live set that I've put together, I tried to make it something that I've dreamed about for a long time, which was the idea of live electronic music production, live techno production on stage in front of a crowd. This is not a pre-prepared set where I have track after track after track broken up into stems, and I just mute and unmute those stems and play around with the filters and the effects to just basically reassemble something that I disassembled before I went into the show. But what I do here is I actually have a live rig where each piece is set up so that it's basically like an instrument. It can be played like an instrument live. I can do different things improvisational with each. I do have a few things, a few bass loops that are prepared, but they're not really set up to go with anything in particular, and so that way I can use them as tools, just like I can use synthesizer sounds and the multiple sequencers and things like that to create something new and not heard before and never to be heard again in the moment during the show, and create kind of a unique moment in time for that show rather than something that I duplicate over and over and over and over again and you can come and see anytime you see me perform. With this one, it was really set up so that if you were there, you got to hear it. If you weren't there, you missed it and you got to come to the next one, and it's not something that's going to be heard again. I did get a few little videos of the show, but I didn't record it. I didn't record the full thing just because I wanted it to be truly that moment in time. And this video is about how I set that up, how I performed it, and towards the end of the video there's a bit of a performance so that you can see how everything really does work together, transitioning from song to song and things like that. Hope this is interesting for you. If it is, and if it's something that you get value out of, I'd love to have you subscribe to the channel. If you haven't already, I think that there's a huge number, I think maybe 80% of you don't subscribe to the channel, so I would love to have you subscribe to the channel, and so that way you can get notified every single time that we put out something new, which is as often as we possibly can. Hopefully you get something great out of this, and here we go, over to the live set. Okay, so a quick run through of this. The Octatrack is the master clock for everything, and that's going MIDI out through a splitter, quad through, which is underneath there. That is going out to the other three pieces of gear. So the master clock is coming from that. I only actually send master clock to all of the devices. I don't send program changes or any of that stuff because I like to be able to do that manually and kind of improvise and change different machines at different times so that it all kind of changes in a smooth way, piece by piece, rather than slamming from one pattern to the other and all of a sudden you see this real dramatic change and it's not as subtle as I would like it to be. The other thing that's unique about this is that all of the four channels of the Digitone and the different sounds that are on those channels and the patterns that are going through those sounds are actually all controlled by the Octatrack. So the MIDI setup of the Octatrack is track 1 on the Digitone, track 5 is track 2, track 2 is track 3, and track 6 is track 4. So they're in the same positions as they are there, just to kind of keep them clear. The main reason why I do that is because that way, if I have a sample or some sort of a melodic thing or anything that has a tone or a note that I'm playing through the sample player and the Octatrack, if I know that key that's in, I can go into the arpeggiator and I can actually set the key of each individual MIDI channel to align with that key. So then anything that I tell the Digitone to do will be in that key. So if I have blank MIDI channels on here in a pattern or in a bank or in a part that have something with a tone, I will match all of those to that tone, even if there's nothing in those MIDI channels. So that way, when I go into making something, anything that I make, I know is going to fit into that key somehow, so that I can do that on the fly and don't have a whole bunch of weird things that are completely flying out of key for that. So just as an example, so if I just push play on this, I mean, you'll see the MIDI pattern going right now, and there's nothing playing because I don't have this turned up. If I turn up, that's what's on track 1 here. And if you look on track 1, there's nothing. There's no MIDI notes. But over here on track 1, so this is actually playing those notes. And I have this in a key that is set already through the arpeggiator, and if I was to change that key on here, notice as it goes into different keys that don't have a note that match, it'll find the nearest note to that one. Easier to hear in something that's a bit more melodic. So this is on the next track, on track 2 here. And if I do the same thing here, I go into that arpeggiator and I go into the key setting. So the notes are still the same, but if I was to change the key here because I changed out a sample or something that was melodic, I can change the key here and it will change out anything that I have sending to these 4 channels, as long as I have those keys aligned in here. So when I'm setting up my banks and my patterns and my parts here, I set them up so that if there's a melodic one, I set all of those MIDI channels so that the arpeggiator matches that key, so it's something that I can improvise live. And just to give you an example here, so if I was to take all of those off and just hit play, obviously there's nothing there. But those are all within that same key that I had set. If I change the key, it changes all of those notes. Now, if I was to go back in and I wanted to change one of these notes, change the note here, so wherever I change those notes, those are going to stay within that same key. If a note that I change that to doesn't fit within that key, it'll jump to the nearest key. So that'll allow me to always keep the synthesizer that I have and the 4 voices of the synthesizer that I'm using in the right key with whatever melodic samples I'm using in the Octatrack. So the Octatrack and the Digitone are basically the bulk of the melodic parts. I'll just go through the Octatrack and how I have this set up. So track 1 is a through track for the audio that's coming out of the Digitone. Track 2 is a flex track, so that's a sample playing track from within the Octatrack. Same with 3, it's also a sample. Same with 4, it's also a sample. So I'm using all of those for sample playback. 5 is a through track from the Analog Rytm, from the audio signal of that, because everything's kind of mixing through here and then being controlled with the launch control. So this is really the mixer, but this is just the sliders of the mixer for the 8 channels. 6 is a through track from the Digitakt. Each one of those is coming in mono because since they're mostly percussive and drum instruments and things like that, most of those, it's fine that they're in mono, and I can still add effects and broaden them out if I want to, but for the most part, having each one of those come in mono is no problem, where the Digitone is coming in as a stereo one, so I get the stereo movement of any of the sounds that I'm using within that. Track 7 is a flex track that's set up as a looper, as a loop recorder, so it will record whatever's coming out of the main here, which is the master on track 8. So that way, if ever I need to stop these and start something and whatever, and I want to like completely change the pattern, I can actually just take a 4-bar loop using this. I have that assigned to a channel here, and I can fade across to it, and then it's only the 4-bar loop. Then I can change these things and I can fade back to whatever the new things are here. One other thing about the Octatrack setup is the scenes. So those are set up basically for the whole project. So if you look, for example, I don't have a ton set up right now, but you've got kind of like a bass scene. This one is a high pass filter of, you know, high passing the master. This is a low pass of the master, and then this is the one that fades back and forth from the looper. But you can set up 16 scenes of all different things. So if you want to have a tape delay or a stutter effect or whatever you want to have in there, you can set those up and have that be kind of through your whole performance. And then as you change out different patterns, different sounds, different samples, you're doing different things, you can still use those same scenes as kind of a continuity all the way throughout your entire performance. One of the keys to this whole setup is that I wanted it to be able to be improvisational. I didn't just want to have kind of preset everything and then all I'm doing is kind of muting and unmuting sections and playing with effects. I wanted to be able to actually produce live in front of people and make up something that was new, never heard before in that configuration, and probably never heard again, just because it was kind of a unique moment in time for what was going on. So this is all set up in that sort of way. It's set up for every piece to be very flexible. So each piece has its job that it does, and then within that job, it's very, very flexible, those things. So obviously the Octatrack is the mixer, master effects. It's the 8 channels of audio, with the 8th channel being the master. The launch control is just controlling the Octatrack. So these 8 sliders are these 8 channels, and we've got mutes and different things like that that are set up by channel. But that's just so that I don't have to menu dive to change things, and I can change multiple faders at the same time, whereas it's a lot harder to do that here. You would have to click to a channel, change a level, do another channel, change the level, do another channel, change the level. This way you can change them all together, bring them all out, bring them all back in together, however you'd like to. This is also acting as a looper. It's acting as the sample playback for 3 different channels worth of different types of samples. And I like to set those up so that whatever is the sample on track 2 is kind of something melodic. Whatever something on track 3 is generally something that is a drone or an atmosphere or a background to kind of add some layers. And 4, that changes a bit. It can be a vocal, it can be a bass line, it can be, you know, just something interesting. I actually have a folder in here that's just called interesting stuff. And so it's basically some things that just kind of add interest. It can be percussion, it can be whatever. So for example, in what I have set up playing here right now, if we bring in track 2, which is the kind of melodic element, so that's kind of a background, but something with a tone, with the melody. What's on track 3 is more of a drone or an atmosphere. So that's just kind of a background tone that's filtered out a bit, and so it's just going to kind of lay a layer down in the background. And then track 4 is actually a vocal that I bring in a couple different times during the performance, which is this.
So never mind what happened yesterday, all your problems, because, well, that's all gone. The only thing tonight that we have is us.
So that kind of is playing on a loop in the background. All of those things are playing on a loop in the background. So whenever I want to bring them in, I can bring them in.
That's all gone. The only thing tonight that we have is us.
So those are just 3 pieces that I can use of the puzzle, and I can use them or not use them. I can bring them in, I can take them out. It doesn't really matter. Then we have Well, then we have the Digitone, so we'll keep going with the melodic bits. As I mentioned, this one is 4 different tracks of synthesizers. So if I bring this up, let's bring all these channels down. All right, so if I bring up one, which is track 1, which is the through machine here that has this audio coming into it, then I have control over each individual one here using the individual channel volume. So if I go to track 1, I can bring up that. All right, if I go to track 2, I can bring that up. All right, if I go to track 3, I can bring that one up. And again, all of these are MIDI programmed over here, so I can change those on the fly during the performance if I want to as well. These are just kind of left over from my performance last week. So this is my 4th MIDI track, so you can see. Right, so if I did want to change these up, I can just add in. So all of those can be changed on the fly during performance. So this is controlling that just to keep things in key, but this is actually where the sounds are coming from. So each one of those sounds is a sound here that's on a different channel, whether it's a preset, whether it's something that I created for that particular group of sounds, because they all sound good together. And that's what I tend to like to do, is I tend to like to have it be low sounds, whether they're basses or kind of low percussive sounds, then mid, and then high. So I've got these next to each other, so I can, wherever I want to bring something in tonally through whatever I'm playing, if I want something high coming in, I can bring this track in, and that's going to bring in, oops, and that would bring that up. So then I would have something, higher for that particular part that I was bringing in, or I can bring it back out. So I have control over each one of these through the channel volumes here. So that's pretty much all of the melodic bits. Then we get into kind of the meat and potatoes of what we do, particularly with the type of techno that I like to play. There's a lot of percussion and a lot of drum sounds and a lot of rhythmic sounds. And those are handled by these 2 machines. The Digitakt being a sample player, I tend to have this do mostly percussion, whether that's things like congas and bongos and cymbals, hi-hats, snare drums, things like that, impacts, things like that. Those tend to be what I play within the different patterns here. And then within the Analog Rytm, because this is a drum synthesizer as well as a sample player, and you can layer those things on top of each other, this is where the majority of the real drum parts come from. So I have the pads set up so that they're the same for every kick as far as kind of what the types of drums are. So this tends to be my kick drum all the time. This is something that's a bit of a snare, although we don't really use a lot of snare sounds, but things that would fall where a snare would fall. Percussion here, a clap, or clap-like things here. Then we've got low, mid, high, and high also, toms or melodic sounds. And then on this top row, it tends to be cymbals, hats, and like closed hats, open hats. And then these can be a cymbal as well. And then these 2 are generally actually things that I will put in as a tonal sound that I can then play on these pads during the performance. So if we were going to go into this one right here, go into chromatic mode. So that can be played there, and then this one down. Those are the sounds for this particular drum kit, but if you go into different drum kits, these are generally things that can be played chromatically, even though they're not always kind of plucky sounds like that. That just tends to be what's on this kit. But the other kits might be things that are more, stabs, or here, I can bring up another kit here. So on a kit like this, if I'm using this track, this would be more like, so that's more of a bass sound. So that's more of a kind of a bell sound. I can then go into other kits here. And this would be more. So I would be able to play those melodically as well as on this. And the idea is to have as much variety as I can, to be able to use live when I'm performing, so that I can actually, you know, make things up live on the fly and perform and play things live, so that it is an improvisational show and not just a clip launching loop playback kind of live set. Just real quick, back to the Digitakt. If you were to listen again, I kind of put these in the same areas or similar types of sounds, so I know where they are. So I know that if I want an open hat, it's pretty much always going to be on 7. So if I'm playing a kick here and I want a hi-hat and I want an open hat, I know I can find one on 7. And if I'm not playing that particular pattern, my hi-hat might be a little bit different. Oops, I was playing something different now. But it might be a little bit different on a different pattern. If I go to a different bank, that hi-hat might be a totally different sound again on that bank. See, this one's a bit harder. It's a little bit more distorted. So it just kind of depends, but it's always going to be a hi-hat in that position. Similar stuff, this is going to be a closed hi-hat on 6 always, so that I can go to that when I need it. When I want to add a closed hi-hat, I know it's there. I know a kick's here. I know a clap is here, right? So I can go to those go-to pieces no matter where they are, and every kit has different sounds in those areas, but they're always those types of sounds. So that way it makes it so that no matter which kit I'm in, no matter which pattern I'm in, I know that the sounds that are in those positions are ones that I can use for specific things. I also wanted to show you the way that I have the patterns and banks and parts set up on the Octatrack, because it is a little bit different the way these remember patterns and banks and sounds and things like that, and the way the Octatrack does, because it's a bit older operating system. So the way I have this set up is I have in the different banks within the patterns, I have the tracks set up, set out on 1, 5, 9, and 13 on each bank. There's 16 banks, so that gives me the opportunity to have more than I need for a live set within one project. Now, the reason why I did it that way, and I didn't do just like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 on one bank, is because each bank has 4 parts, and parts are where the Octatrack stores information about what sounds, so what samples and things like that are being used in that part. And so I set it this way so that each pattern has, each bank has 4 patterns, so that I could assign one part to each pattern. So if you go into pattern 1, you're on part 1. If you go to pattern 2, you're on part 2. If you go to pattern 3, you're on part 3. If you go to pattern 4, you're in part 4. And what that means is that each one of these patterns has different melodic, drone, and interesting stuff, and whatever key any melodic bits are in, the MIDI that's associated with that particular channel is using the amp page and going into the ARP setup, using that, it's set to be in key with anything that's melodic. So that way, again, it allows for a ton of improvisation without having to worry too much about deviating way off of key and having things be super weird, at least within the Octatrack and the Digitone. What this also allows me to do is some very smooth transitions without having any of the program changes or anything like that be automatic. So if I have a drum pattern going here and I've got a hi-hat going here and I've got a sound here that I'm using and I want to change this out and move on to my next track, I can do something melodic over on this side. I can do those things and I can actually fade this out. I can bring in a melodic element over here if I want to do that. So now that's just the Analog Rytm and the Digitakt playing. So now I'm free to go into patterns and change this. So now I'm on a new pattern in a new part with new samples in there. So now if I was to bring this up, I've in effect changed songs, covering the change of this by using these machines. Now anything that's playing here would be in key with this as well, because those are linked together and that's changed over. And so it just gives me an opportunity to be able to change in whatever way I feel at the moment, and in a way that I can be flexible and improvise going from track to track. All right, well now I'm going to do just a little bit of a jam around with some of the stuff that I have just in here for right now. I'm not sure exactly what's set up right now, but just to let you know, the way I start things off, I generally have my master at on this kind of neutral line here. I keep that so that there's a little extra boost if I need it, but for the most part, I'd rather have it stay there. And then I keep my two kind of drum machine, rhythm machines already up, but nothing playing on them, so that they're ready to go, so that I can start with that and then I can fade in anything else that I want. So go ahead and hit play so you can see everything's going now, but there's nothing going on in the background yet because none of these have anything on them and the other ones aren't up yet. So I generally like to get started with the melodic piece or a drone or something like that, and then we'll just kind of take it from there. Hope it was entertaining. Hope you got something interesting out of it, and hopefully I gave you some tips. And you know, a lot of pain and suffering and trial and error went into creating that. So hopefully I can help you guys avoid some of that by showing you the way that I found, and maybe it'll give you some ideas for creating your own live set and the way that you want to do it. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I hope to see you in the next one. Take care of each other.